Margaret had always loved driving her BMW through the winding roads of the mountains. It gave her a sense of freedom she rarely felt in her busy life, a moment away from meetings, phone calls, and endless schedules. Tonight the sun had set long ago, leaving the world outside in shadows. The sky was a deep navy blue and the first stars had begun to twinkle faintly, almost shyly between the jagged peaks. Margaret's headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off the wet patches on the road from an earlier rain. She adjusted her seat, a small smile touching her lips, feeling the comforting hum of the engine beneath her. Everything seemed calm, almost peaceful, but the mountains could be unpredictable and the calm she felt was only temporary. As she turned a sharp bend, her car jolted slightly. She frowned, thinking it was just a small bump or a loose stone on the road. But moments later, the BMW shuddered violently, and the engine made a strange coughing sound. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She pressed the accelerator, but the car only gave a weak groan in response. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she guided the car to the side of the road. The mountain was steep and narrow, lined with tall pines and jagged rocks, and she had nowhere else to go. Margaret tried the ignition again. The engine clicked, coughed, and then fell silent. Panic began to rise inside her, even though she tried to push it down. She was a woman used to control. She had spent years building a successful career, climbing the corporate ladder, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees, and managing millions of dollars. She had learned to solve problems quickly, to adapt, to think clearly under pressure. But tonight, on this dark mountain road, none of her skills seemed useful. The car wouldn't start, the wind had picked up, and the shadows of the forest seemed to grow longer and darker with each passing second. Margaret got out of the car and closed the door behind her, the cold night air biting at her cheeks. She hugged herself, trying to keep warm, and looked around. The trees were tall and dense, their branches swaying in the wind. The rustle of leaves sounded louder than usual, almost like whispers in the dark. She could see no other cars, no lights, no signs of human life. The road stretched ahead and behind, winding through the mountains, but it was empty, silent and lonely. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the cold, but from the sudden awareness of how small and vulnerable she was in this vast, dark place. Margaret opened her car door again and leaned over the hood, inspecting the engine as best as she could. She had no tools, no mechanics knowledge, just her hands and determination. The problem was beyond her, she realized, and that realization brought a wave of frustration. She had always been someone who could fix anything, who could make things happen. But here, alone in the darkness, her wealth, her status, her achievements, they meant nothing. She felt a strange mix of anger, embarrassment, and fear. How could a simple breakdown make her feel so powerless? Sighing deeply, Margaret closed the hood and walked back to the driver's seat. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket she kept in the trunk for emergencies and tried to think. Her phone, usually a lifeline in any situation, had no signal. She tapped it, hoping for a miracle, but the screen only displayed no service. The mountains were too remote, the peaks too high, and the valleys too deep for her connection to reach. She was cut off from the world. For a moment, she considered walking down the road to find help. But the darkness was thick, the forest on both sides dense, and the road was slippery. She knew she could get lost or worse. So she stayed inside, hugging herself, listening to the wind and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere in the distance. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Margaret began to think about her life. She had everything she had ever wanted: money, a successful career, a beautiful home, fine clothes, and a car she adored. She had traveled the world, dined in the finest restaurants, and met people who seemed larger than life. Yet for all her accomplishments, she had rarely felt truly at peace. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when she felt a genuine connection with someone or something. But those moments were few and far between. Here in the cold, silent mountains, she realized how isolated she had become despite all her wealth. Her mind wandered to the small things she had overlooked in her pursuit of success: the laughter of neighbors' children she never really knew, the simple joy of a quiet walk in the park, the warmth of a smile from a stranger. She thought about her family, who often seemed distant even when they were near, caught up in their own busy lives. And she thought about friendships, some of which had faded over the years because she had been too busy or too proud to maintain them. The breakdown of her car, she realized, was more than just a mechanical failure. It was a moment that forced her to slow down, to pause and to face herself. Margaret leaned back in her seat, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She took deep breaths, letting the cold mountain air fill her lungs. She focused on the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and strong, reminding her that she was alive. She looked out at the trees again, trying to see them not as menacing shadows but as part of a larger world that was still beautiful and alive, even in darkness. The stars above, scattered like tiny diamonds across the sky, reminded her that she was part of something bigger than her problems, bigger than her fears. As she sat there, a strange feeling began to grow within her, a mixture of hope and curiosity. She had no idea how long she would be here, or if anyone would come to help. But the night, for all its darkness, seemed to hold a promise. Margaret felt a tiny spark of excitement, the kind she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, she thought, this unexpected stop on a lonely mountain road was not just a problem, but an opportunity to see life differently, to meet someone who might change her perspective, or to discover something about herself she had forgotten. Hours passed slowly. Margaret's fingers grew numb despite her blanket, and her eyes ached from staring into the dark. Every sound, an owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of a small animal in the underbrush, the whisper of the wind, made her jump slightly. Yet she also felt a strange connection to the night. It was quiet, yes, but it was also alive, full of possibilities. The more she listened, the more she realized how rarely she allowed herself to simply be present, to watch, to wait, to feel. This night, despite its fear, was teaching her patience, humility, and resilience. She thought about what she would do when help arrived. Would she thank them? Offer money? Invite them to her home? She didn't know, but she felt that whatever happened, it would not just be about fixing her car. It would be about connection, about trust, and about human kindness. Margaret realized that life, no matter how wealthy or successful one might be, could change in an instant. One moment you are in control, driving confidently along a mountain road, and the next you are completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. That thought both frightened her and fascinated her. As she prepared herself for a long night, Margaret felt a mixture of fear, hope, and anticipation. She hugged her blanket closer and leaned back, staring at the dark road ahead. Somewhere out there beyond the trees and hills, someone might come. Someone who could help her. Someone who could remind her that even in the loneliest, darkest moments, there was light to be found, not just in headlights or stars, but in the presence of another human being. And with that thought, Margaret settled into her seat, ready to face whatever the night might bring. She did not yet know that a kind stranger would soon appear, someone who would change the course of her evening, and perhaps even the way she viewed her life. But in that moment she waited, alert and expectant, feeling both small and strangely alive on that dark mountain road. Margaret stayed in her car, hugging the thin blanket tightly around her shoulders. The darkness outside seemed endless, and the cold night air seeped through the windows. The mountains, usually a source of beauty and calm for her drives, now seemed intimidating, almost alive. Every small sound, the distant rustle of a branch, the faint whistle of the wind, felt magnified in the stillness. Her heart beat faster with every unfamiliar noise. She realized in that moment how fragile her sense of control was. For all her wealth and experience, Margaret had never felt so powerless. At the office, she could make decisions that affected hundreds of people. In her home, she could command respect, order, and efficiency. But out here, on a lonely mountain road with a car that refused to start, all of that meant nothing. She was just a human being, small and vulnerable, alone with the dark and the cold. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and closed her eyes, trying to calm the rising panic. Her mind wandered to the practical things she could do. She had emergency supplies in the trunk, a flashlight, a first aid kit, bottled water, and a small food pack. She considered going out to the roadside to look for help, but the idea frightened her. The road was narrow, surrounded by thick forest on both sides, and she couldn't see more than a few meters ahead. Slipping, falling, or losing her way seemed frighteningly easy. She also thought about walking to find a phone signal, but she had no idea how far she would have to go, and she was not dressed for a long hike in the cold. She sighed deeply and hugged the blanket tighter. Margaret's thoughts turned inward. She realized that she had been living most of her life in a bubble, created by wealth and comfort. She had always relied on herself and the systems she had built. Drivers, assistants, security, friends who were often more acquaintances than companions. These people made life smooth and predictable. But now, in the stark, unforgiving quiet of the mountains, she had no safety net. She could feel fear, and it was both shocking and humbling. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, and yet part of her understood that it was necessary. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. The night had deepened, and the cold was starting to seep into her bones despite her blanket. Her phone, still without signal, was slowly losing its battery, adding to her sense of helplessness. She turned on the interior light and examined the car again, hoping she might find a clue, something she could fix, but it was too complex for her knowledge. Margaret had never been mechanically inclined. She had always relied on experts to handle things like this. She tapped the dashboard lightly, willing the car to respond, but it stayed silent. The darkness outside was complete now, and the occasional beam of passing clouds across the moon made shadows dance across the road and trees. Margaret felt both fear and awe. The mountains were beautiful in their own way, but beauty without safety felt threatening. She thought about the stories she had read as a child, stories of travelers lost in the woods, of sudden storms, and of mysterious strangers. At the time, those tales had seemed exciting. Now in the cold, isolated night, they seemed all too real. Her imagination began to paint shadows as figures, her heartbeat quickening with every imagined movement. Trying to distract herself, Margaret reflected on her life. She had built a business from scratch, worked tirelessly to secure her position, and had acquired almost everything she thought she wanted. But in this moment, with no one to help and nothing to rely on, she realized how little she had paid attention to the people around her. Family, friends, even casual acquaintances. They were all part of her world. Yet she often treated relationships as secondary to work, wealth, and status. The contrast between her usual life and the helplessness of this night felt stark. She thought about the friends she had lost touch with over the years. Some had moved away, others had changed, and a few had simply disappeared from her life because she had not made the effort. And she realized that even her success had often come at the cost of connection. She had been admired, yes, but not truly known or understood. That realization made her heart ache in a quiet, subtle way. The mountains, with their vast emptiness, seemed to mirror her own loneliness, reminding her that wealth could not protect her from the human need for companionship, understanding, and kindness. Margaret tried to occupy her mind with practical ideas. She considered leaving the car and walking to find help, but the forest was too dense and the road too narrow. She thought about using her phone again, hoping for a miracle signal, but there was none. She tried the ignition one more time, but the engine gave only a weak, pitiful cough before going silent again. A shiver ran through her body, part fear, part frustration. Even her attempts at problem-solving seemed useless. She had never felt so out of control. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and Margaret's anxiety grew with each passing hour. The night sky, beautiful as it was, seemed indifferent to her plight. The stars above twinkled quietly, but they did not offer warmth or guidance. She thought about the safety of her home, the comfort of her life in the city, and felt a pang of longing for the familiar. But she also realized that being forced into this situation had a strange effect on her. It made her see the world differently. She began to notice details she had never paid attention to before. The patterns of the leaves in the moonlight, the shapes of the trees, the way the wind moved across the mountain slopes. Margaret shivered again and wrapped herself tighter in the blanket. Her thoughts drifted to the unknown. She wondered who might come along this road, if anyone would come at all. In her usual life, she had control over every encounter, every meeting, every transaction. But here she had no control, and that loss of control was terrifying and oddly liberating. She began to feel a flicker of curiosity alongside the fear, a question about the world beyond her own experience, beyond her wealth and her carefully curated life. She tried to focus on breathing slowly, on staying calm. She counted in her mind, trying to measure time, but it seemed impossible. Minutes blurred into hours. Her teeth chattered as the cold worsened and fatigue began to set in. Yet even in exhaustion, Margaret's mind remained alert. She knew she had to be careful, to stay aware, to watch for any sign of help. She looked down the empty road, straining to see anything in the darkness, her mind creating shapes from the shadows. Every time she thought she saw headlights, her heart leapt, only for the illusion to vanish moments later. Margaret's thoughts drifted once more to her life, to the constant rush of work and ambition. She realized how rarely she had allowed herself to be still, to wait, to experience life without planning or controlling it. She had always rushed from one goal to another, measuring her worth in accomplishments and possessions. Yet here, stripped of comfort and certainty, she felt a raw, honest connection to the world around her. Fear was present, yes, but so was awareness. She noticed the faint sound of a stream somewhere nearby, the rustle of animals in the underbrush, the crisp scent of pine in the cold mountain air. Hours passed. The sky darkened further, and Margaret remained vigilant. She felt the cold in her fingers and toes, but she refused to succumb to despair. She thought about what it meant to be human, to rely on luck, circumstance, and sometimes the kindness of strangers. She reminded herself that fear, though powerful, was temporary. She focused on hope, however faint, believing that someone would eventually appear on this lonely road. Margaret looked back at her car, its sleek shape now seeming less like a symbol of wealth and more like a fragile cocoon of safety. She leaned back in her seat, hugging her knees to keep warm, and closed her eyes for a moment. In the darkness, in the silence, she felt both fear and clarity. She realized that no matter how prepared she was in life, there were moments when control slipped away, and all that mattered was patience, awareness, and openness to help. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, the world continued. Silent, vast, mysterious. Margaret didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she would face it. Her life had always been about determination, and even now, faced with helplessness, she refused to give in to despair. She would wait, she would watch, and she would hope. And perhaps when the right person appeared, she would find that help, kindness, and human connection were worth more than anything money could buy. As the night grew colder and the mountain wind whispered through the trees, Margaret settled into the quiet rhythm of waiting. She listened, she observed, and she reflected. Fear was still there, but it had softened, replaced partially by a strange sense of curiosity and anticipation. The world was unpredictable, the night long and the road uncertain. Yet Margaret, alone on this dark mountain road, felt a quiet determination building inside her, a belief that even in the most challenging moments, hope could arrive in unexpected ways. And somewhere down the road she could not yet see, that hope was beginning to move toward her. Margaret had been waiting for what felt like hours. The cold wind cut through her thin blanket, and the darkness outside seemed endless. She tried to stay alert, eyes scanning the faint outlines of the mountains, her ears tuned to the slightest sound. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made her heart jump. She felt small, fragile, and strangely exposed. Despite her fear, she refused to give in to panic. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm, and to be ready for anything. Then a distant glow appeared on the road ahead. At first it was barely visible, like a firefly flickering in the night. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She blinked and adjusted her eyes, and the glow grew brighter. It was the headlights of a vehicle slowly approaching. Relief and cautious hope surged through her. Could this be someone who would help her? She tried to stay calm as the lights drew closer, the vehicle moving steadily but not too fast. Soon the shape of the vehicle became clear. It was an old pickup truck, worn and slightly rusted, with a single pair of headlights cutting through the darkness. Margaret noticed the simplicity of it, contrasting sharply with the sleek BMW she had driven before breaking down. She wondered who could be out here at this late hour in such a remote place. The truck slowed as it approached, eventually coming to a gentle stop a few meters from her car. A man stepped out, his silhouette clear in the headlights. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and his boots crunched softly against the gravel road. "Hello?" he called out in a calm, steady voice. "Are you okay?" Margaret's voice trembled slightly as she responded. I think my car broke down. I don't know what to do. I've been waiting here for a long time." The man smiled gently. "Don't worry. I can take a look. I have some tools in my truck." He moved closer, and Margaret could see that his face was friendly, with kind eyes that seemed to understand her situation without judgment. The sight of another person, someone willing to help, was comforting. For the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope. "My name is Margaret," she said, introducing herself. "Thank you for stopping." "Daniel," he replied with a small nod. "Let's see what's going on with your car." He opened his truck and retrieved a small toolbox. Margaret watched as he examined her BMW carefully, his hands moving with skill and confidence. He checked the engine, inspected the wires, and muttered softly to himself as he worked. Margaret had never realized how complicated a car engine could be. She had always relied on others to handle such matters, but watching Daniel work, she was struck by his competence and calmness. His presence was reassuring, and she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. While he worked, Margaret tried to make conversation, mostly to distract herself from the cold and the fear that lingered. "It's strange," she said. "I never thought I'd be stuck out here alone with no one around. I guess life has a way of humbling you." Daniel glanced up, smiling. "It happens to everyone at some point. The world can surprise you, especially in places like these." Margaret nodded. "I guess I'm used to having control over everything. Work, life, people. But here I can't control anything. It's unnerving." Daniel listened patiently, not judging her, just letting her speak. "Sometimes losing control is the only way to see what's really important," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and somehow soothing. Margaret considered his words carefully, realizing the truth in them. She had spent so much time chasing success and wealth that she had forgotten the value of patience, humility, and human connection. As Daniel worked, he found the problem: a loose wire that had caused the engine to fail. He fixed it with steady hands and careful attention, explaining briefly what he was doing in case Margaret was curious. "This part here was loose," he said. "It happens. Cars break down, but it's nothing serious. You'll be fine soon." Margaret watched, impressed by his knowledge and skill. There was a simplicity in his life that she envied. A life where hard work, honesty, and practical skills mattered more than wealth or status. She realized how insulated she had been, relying on her money to solve every problem. Here in the cold, dark mountains, someone without wealth, but with competence and kindness, could solve what she could not. It made her feel humble and also grateful. While he worked, Margaret noticed small details about Daniel that made him seem even more genuine. His hands were strong but gentle, his movements precise but not rushed. He talked quietly, explaining what he was doing without making her feel inadequate or foolish. There was no arrogance, no desire for recognition, just a willingness to help. Margaret found herself relaxing, the fear that had dominated her night slowly giving way to curiosity and even admiration. Hours of anxiety, cold, and isolation seemed to melt away as Daniel worked. Margaret realized how rare it was to meet someone who helped without expecting anything in return. She thought about her own life, about how many times she had used wealth or influence to get what she wanted, and how rarely she had encountered pure, unselfish kindness. It was a lesson she didn't expect, and it made her heart swell with gratitude. Finally, after careful inspection and adjustment, Daniel stepped back. "Try it now," he said. Margaret took a deep breath and turned the ignition. The BMW's engine roared to life, steady and strong, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Relief flooded her, and she smiled, a genuine wide smile that had been missing for hours. "It's working," she exclaimed. "Thank you so much." Daniel waved his hand. "Don't mention it. I'm just glad I could help." Margaret looked at him thoughtfully. Here was a man she had never met before, yet he had appeared at the right moment, offering help without hesitation, without expectation, without judgment. His kindness had changed the course of her night, and perhaps something more. She realized that sometimes strangers could teach lessons that wealth and experience could not. "Can I offer you some money for your trouble?" she asked almost instinctively. Daniel shook his head with a smile. "No need. Just glad you're okay." Margaret nodded, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the cold night. She realized that her life had been full of transactions, money for services, influence for favors. But this moment was different. It was pure human kindness freely given, and it mattered more than anything money could buy. She felt a quiet sense of humility, a recognition that she had been sheltered in ways she hadn't appreciated until now. For a few moments, they stood together in silence. The BMW's headlights illuminated the surrounding trees, and the mountains rose like silent guardians around them. Margaret noticed the stars above, bright and countless, reminding her that the world was vast and full of mysteries. She felt small, yes, but also connected, to Daniel, to the mountains, to the universe itself. She realized that the night, which had begun as a source of fear, had become a space of reflection, learning, and unexpected connection. "I can't thank you enough," she said softly. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Daniel smiled again, simple and sincere. Sometimes a little help goes a long way. Just be careful on these roads. They can be tricky. Margaret nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and introspection. She had spent so much of her life focusing on wealth, success, and control, and yet it was the kindness of a stranger that had reminded her of what really mattered. She realized that life could be unpredictable, and that moments of connection, brief, unexpected, and unplanned, were often the most meaningful. As she prepared to drive again, she noticed the quiet confidence in Daniel's eyes, the steady way he moved, and the warmth of his presence. It struck her that the world was full of people like him, people who lived simply, worked hard, and cared for others without expectation. She felt a deep sense of respect and admiration, and also a quiet longing to live more genuinely, more openly, and with more awareness of the people around her. Margaret started the BMW and slowly began to drive, the engine smooth and powerful under her hands. Daniel waved one last time before climbing back into his truck. She watched as he drove slowly down the mountain road, the glow of his headlights fading into the distance. A part of her wished she could thank him more, perhaps invite him to her home or find a way to repay his kindness. But she realized that some gestures, like some lessons, were meant to be received and remembered, not bought or repaid. As she drove, Margaret reflected on the night. The darkness, the fear, the isolation, they had all brought her to this moment of clarity. She thought about her own life, the choices she had made, and the people she had overlooked. She realized that human kindness, empathy, and connection were far more valuable than money, status, or possessions. Daniel had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that life was not just about control or achievement, but about understanding, compassion, and the small, meaningful interactions that could change a person's perspective. By the time she reached the next bend in the road, Margaret felt a subtle transformation within herself. She was still wealthy, still successful, but her priorities had shifted slightly. She understood now that wealth alone could not protect her from the uncertainties of life, and that true fulfillment came from connection and compassion. The night had been long, frightening, and cold, yet it had given her a gift far more precious than any material possession, a reminder of humanity, and the unexpected ways it could touch one's life. Margaret drove on, the road winding beneath her tires, and a quiet sense of gratitude filled her. She didn't know what lay ahead, more challenges, more uncertainties, but she felt prepared in a way she hadn't before. The kindness of a stranger had not only saved her from a dark mountain road, but had also opened her eyes to the deeper lessons of life. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly awake, aware, and ready to embrace the world in all its unpredictable beauty. After Daniel fixed her car, Margaret continued driving slowly down the mountain road. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, and she felt a sense of calm she had not experienced in years. The cold night air no longer felt as sharp, and even the darkness seemed less intimidating. The simple act of receiving help from a stranger had shifted something inside her. It was a subtle change, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew stronger with every passing mile. Margaret's thoughts returned to Daniel. She remembered his calm presence, his patient manner, and the way he had worked quietly without asking for anything in return. She had met countless people in her life, business associates, colleagues, clients, but very few had offered genuine kindness without expectation. Daniel's actions were a reminder that human goodness could exist independently of wealth or status. That thought warmed her, more than any blanket or heater ever could. She glanced at her car's dashboard, the engine now steady and strong. Margaret realized that the car, her prized BMW, had always been a symbol of control and status. Yet tonight it had failed her at the worst possible moment. And yet, in that failure, she had learned something valuable. Wealth and material possessions could never replace human connection, understanding, and compassion. The irony was not lost on her. Here she was in a luxurious car, and a simple act of kindness from a man in a worn pickup truck had changed her night, and her perspective, far more than any object ever could. Margaret's mind wandered as she drove, thinking about the world beyond her usual life. She recalled the people she had overlooked in her pursuit of success, employees she barely knew, neighbors she had never spoken to, distant relatives she had ignored. Life had always been a series of transactions for her, moments measured in productivity and results. But tonight had reminded her of the simple truth. Life was unpredictable, and the most meaningful moments often came from connection and compassion, not money or influence. She remembered the way Daniel had listened patiently, letting her speak without judgment. His eyes had conveyed understanding, his voice had been calm and soothing, and his presence had been reassuring. Margaret realized that she had rarely encountered this kind of unselfish attention in her life. People often listened to her because they had to, because of her position or because it benefited them. Daniel had listened simply because he cared. It was a thought that made her chest tighten with gratitude. As she rounded another curve, Margaret noticed the stars above the mountains, bright and countless against the black sky. The vastness of the universe had always been something she admired, but tonight, it felt intimate, almost comforting. She felt small in comparison, yet also part of something much larger than herself. She thought about her life, her wealth, her career, and she realized that all of it had prepared her for success. But not for moments like this. Moments when patience, humility, and openness to others mattered more than skill, status, or intelligence. Margaret slowed the car, pulling over to the side for a moment. She wanted to take a deep breath to feel the night fully. The air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth, and the quiet was profound. She realized how rarely she allowed herself to simply pause, to breathe, and to reflect. Life had always been a race for her, a series of goals, deadlines, and achievements. Yet here, on this mountain road, she found herself experiencing something different: presence, awareness, and a strange but welcome calm. She remembered the moments with Daniel, how he had not only fixed her car but had offered reassurance, patience, and understanding. It was more than help. It was a demonstration of human connection, an unspoken message that kindness could exist without expectation. Margaret reflected on her own life and realized that she had rarely given such kindness freely. She had measured relationships, favors, and gestures, often expecting something in return. But tonight she had experienced a gift without condition, and it had touched her deeply. Margaret thought about the hours she had spent alone, waiting and worrying. Fear had been her companion, yet it had also forced her to reflect on her priorities and the life she had built. She had spent so much time seeking control, security, and success, but she realized that these things could never protect her from the uncertainties of life. What mattered more were the moments of connection, the acts of compassion, and the willingness to trust and accept help when it was offered. Driving on, she felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected lessons the night had given her. Margaret began to imagine what her life could be like if she embraced this perspective more fully. She thought about being more present with her friends and family, offering genuine kindness without expectation, and noticing the small joys that she had previously ignored. The thought filled her with a quiet excitement, a sense that life could be richer and more meaningful than she had ever allowed herself to believe. Margaret's thoughts turned again to Daniel. She wished she could thank him more, perhaps even stay in touch, but she understood that this night was meant to be experienced and remembered, not controlled or claimed. She realized that some lessons were fleeting, and their impact was in the moment itself. Even if she never saw Daniel again, his actions had left an imprint on her heart, a reminder of the goodness that existed in the world and the power of selfless acts. As she continued down the winding road, the night felt less like a threat and more like a companion. The darkness, which had once seemed endless and oppressive, now seemed alive with possibilities. She noticed the subtle details of the mountains, the shadows of the trees, the way the wind moved through the branches, the glimmer of distant moonlight on rocky surfaces. Margaret realized that she had rarely taken the time to observe the world in this way. Her life had been full of speed, efficiency, and productivity, leaving little room for quiet appreciation or reflection. Margaret thought about the way Daniel had treated her, not as a wealthy woman in need of help, but as a human being deserving of respect and care. It was a lesson she would carry with her. She realized that true kindness was not about status, money, or power. It was about empathy, patience, and willingness to help without expectation. She felt inspired to incorporate this lesson into her own life, to treat others with genuine care and to value the small, meaningful interactions that built connection and trust. As the night deepened, Margaret felt a sense of transformation within herself. She was still wealthy and successful, but her understanding of life had shifted. She realized that control, achievement, and material wealth could never replace the warmth of human connection. The kindness of a stranger had opened her eyes to this truth, and she felt a profound gratitude for the experience. She understood that life was unpredictable, and that the most meaningful moments often came from unexpected encounters, moments of vulnerability, and acts of compassion. Margaret's journey down the mountain road continued, and with every mile, she felt a growing sense of clarity and purpose. She thought about how she could apply the lessons of this night to her life, how she could be more present, more patient, and more compassionate. The fear and frustration she had felt earlier had been transformed into insight and reflection, and she felt stronger for it. She realized that life's challenges were not just obstacles, they were opportunities for growth, understanding, and connection. As she drove, Margaret imagined the people she could help, the moments she could be kind without expectation, and the relationships she could nurture. She understood that wealth and success were not the ultimate measures of life's value. Instead, it was the quality of her interactions, the depth of her empathy, and the authenticity of her connections that would truly define her happiness. The night had given her a gift she could not have anticipated, a chance to see life through a lens of humility, gratitude, and awareness. Margaret felt a sense of peace settle over her. The darkness was no longer threatening. It was a quiet, reflective space that had allowed her to confront her fears, her limitations, and her priorities. She realized that fear was not something to be avoided entirely, but something to be acknowledged and understood. In recognizing her vulnerability, she had gained strength and clarity, and she was determined to carry these insights into her life beyond this mountain road. She glanced once more at the stars above, their light steady and calm in the vast night sky. Margaret felt a connection not only to the universe but to the human experiences that were part of it, acts of kindness, moments of reflection, and the quiet presence of others in times of need. She understood that life was unpredictable, and that it was these small, unexpected experiences that often left the deepest impressions. Daniel's presence had been one of those moments, and she would carry it with her always. Margaret drove on, her mind calm, her heart open, and her spirit renewed. She understood that life's true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in the depth of human connection, the ability to show and receive kindness, and the awareness of the beauty and unpredictability of the world. The mountains around her, once intimidating and dark, now seemed alive with lessons, reflections, and possibilities. She felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, confident that the night had taught her something lasting and profound. And as the road stretched ahead, winding through shadow and light, Margaret felt a quiet sense of hope and determination. The encounter with Daniel had reminded her that even in the darkest moments, connection, kindness, and empathy could light the way, and that sometimes, the most unexpected people could change your life in ways you could never predict. Margaret continued driving slowly, the road winding beneath her tires like a ribbon of silver in the moonlight. The mountains loomed on either side, tall and quiet, their shadows stretching long into the night. She felt the warmth of her car's heater and the steady hum of the engine beneath her hands, but more than that, she felt a change within herself, a quiet shift that she could not yet fully describe. The encounter with Daniel had left a profound impression. She realized that the night had been about more than a car breaking down. It had been about humility, connection, and the unexpected lessons life could offer. The fear and frustration she had experienced earlier seemed distant now, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and reflection. She thought about how rarely she had paused to consider the value of human kindness in her own life. Margaret's thoughts returned to Daniel. She remembered his gentle smile, his calm voice, and the way he had worked without expectation or judgment. It struck her that wealth, status, and power could never replace the quiet goodness of a person willing to help, simply because they could. She reflected on her own life and realized how often she had relied on her money or influence to solve problems, rather than seeking authentic connection or showing true compassion. Daniel had reminded her of a truth she had long overlooked. The world was full of people willing to care, and these moments of generosity were more valuable than anything she could buy. As the minutes passed, Margaret began to think about the future. She considered the relationships she had neglected, the family members she had not seen in years, the friends she had lost touch with, and the casual acquaintances she had barely acknowledged. She felt a surge of determination to reconnect, to be present, and to offer kindness without expecting anything in return. The night had taught her that life's richness was not measured in wealth or accomplishments, but in the depth of human connection. Margaret also reflected on her own fears. She had always believed that control and planning could prevent disaster, that money could solve almost any problem. Yet tonight she had learned that unpredictability was part of life, and that true strength came from patience, adaptability, and openness to help. She felt a quiet pride in how she had endured the hours of waiting, cold, and uncertainty. It had been difficult, yes, but it had also been enlightening. She realized that moments of vulnerability were not weaknesses. They were opportunities for growth, reflection, and learning. Driving along the winding mountain road, Margaret remembered the lessons she had learned in the quiet hours of the night. She thought about the small joys she had overlooked in her pursuit of success, the laughter of children in her neighborhood, the beauty of a quiet sunset, the warmth of a simple smile from a stranger. These things, she realized, were not trivial. They were the essence of life. Wealth and status could not replace them, and in many ways they were more precious than anything money could buy. Her thoughts drifted to the idea of giving back. She had often donated to charities and supported causes, but she realized that those acts, while meaningful, were often transactional in their own way. True giving, she understood now, was not about recognition or status. It was about connection, compassion, and genuine care. She resolved to incorporate this principle into her life, to look for ways to make meaningful differences in the lives of others, however small, and to be present for people in ways she had rarely allowed herself before. Margaret drove on, reflecting on the simplicity and authenticity of Daniel's life. He had not relied on wealth, status, or recognition to define himself. He had worked hard, lived honestly, and offered help freely. It was a contrast to her own life, which had been filled with luxury, ambition, and careful calculation. Yet despite the differences, she recognized the value in both approaches. Daniel's example had shown her that life's greatest lessons often came from ordinary, genuine acts of kindness, and she felt inspired to embrace that mindset. As she descended further down the mountain, Margaret realized how profoundly the night had changed her perspective. She no longer saw the darkness as threatening, but as a space for reflection and growth. The quiet, the stillness, and the isolation had forced her to confront her fears, her limitations, and her priorities. She felt stronger and more grounded than she had in years. The encounter with Daniel had been more than a moment of help. It had been a lesson in humility, empathy, and the power of human connection. Margaret thought about the moments she had spent alone, waiting for help, and how those hours had allowed her to reflect deeply on her life. Fear had been her companion, yes, but it had also been a teacher. She understood now that life's challenges were opportunities in disguise, moments that could lead to insight, growth, and even transformation. She felt grateful for the night, for the breakdown, and for the chance encounter that had reminded her of what truly mattered. By the time she reached the first signs of civilization, the faint glow of distant lights from a small town, Margaret felt a sense of closure. The mountains behind her seemed less imposing, and the road ahead appeared full of possibilities. She realized that she had been given a gift, a reminder that human kindness could illuminate even the darkest moments, and that life's richness was found not in wealth, but in connection, compassion, and presence. Margaret parked her BMW at a small roadside cafe, deciding to rest before continuing her journey home. She stepped out into the crisp morning air, feeling the first light of dawn breaking across the horizon. The stars had faded, replaced by soft shades of pink and gold. The mountains, once dark and intimidating, now seemed peaceful and welcoming. She took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air, the quiet, and the sense of renewal she felt inside. Sitting at a small table by the window, sipping a warm cup of coffee, Margaret reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about Daniel one last time, feeling gratitude for his kindness and the lessons he had taught her. She realized that some people enter your life briefly, yet their impact can be lasting. Daniel's presence had reminded her of the importance of humility, the value of empathy, and the joy of giving and receiving kindness without expectation. Margaret knew that her life would never be the same. She would continue to work hard and manage her wealth, but she would do so with a new perspective. She would prioritize human connection, embrace opportunities for kindness, and pay attention to the small joys of life she had previously overlooked. She understood that life's unpredictable moments, like a car breaking down on a dark mountain road, could become turning points, guiding her toward greater awareness, gratitude, and fulfillment. As she finished her coffee, Margaret looked out the window at the mountains behind her. They were beautiful, silent, and majestic, and she felt a sense of peace that she had not known in years. She realized that fear, frustration, and uncertainty were natural parts of life, but they could also lead to growth, insight, and transformation. Her encounter with Daniel had been a reminder that life's most meaningful lessons often come in unexpected ways, from people we might never meet again, in moments we never planned for. Margaret left the cafe feeling renewed and inspired. She drove home with a new awareness of life's unpredictability and a deep appreciation for human kindness. She knew that the world was full of challenges, but she also knew that compassion, patience, and empathy could make those challenges more manageable and even meaningful. The night on the mountain road had been difficult, frightening, and cold, yet it had gifted her something far more valuable than comfort or safety: clarity, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. By the time she arrived home, Margaret felt transformed. She understood that her wealth and success were not the ultimate measures of her life's value. What mattered most were the moments of connection, the acts of kindness, and the presence of others in times of need. Daniel had shown her this truth, and she felt inspired to carry it forward in her own life, to be the kind of person who could offer help, support, and compassion without expectation. Margaret stepped out of her BMW and looked up at her house, its lights warm and inviting. She realized that while she had returned to her world of comfort and luxury, she would never forget the lessons of the mountain road. She felt a quiet determination to live differently, to notice the small joys, to nurture meaningful relationships, and to embrace life's uncertainties with grace and openness. The night had been a turning point, a moment of transformation that would stay with her forever. As she closed the door behind her and walked inside, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced fear, frustration, and isolation, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of what truly mattered. The kindness of a stranger had changed her night, and in a way it had changed her life. Margaret smiled to herself, knowing that while the road ahead would continue to twist and turn, she was ready to navigate it with a new perspective, a grateful heart, and a deeper appreciation for the beauty of human connection. That night, as she finally went to bed, Margaret reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that life's richest experiences often came unexpectedly, from ordinary people and simple acts of kindness. She had been reminded that wealth could never replace compassion, that control was an illusion, and that the most meaningful moments often arose from vulnerability, patience, and openness. The darkness of the mountain road had brought clarity and transformation, and she felt profoundly grateful for every moment. Margaret drifted to sleep with a calm heart, knowing that life was full of surprises, challenges, and opportunities for growth. She had learned that even in the darkest moments, light could be found not in wealth, possessions, or status, but in the kindness of others, the strength of human connection, and the quiet awareness of life's beauty. And as she slept, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes a simple act of help from a stranger could change everything, and that the lessons of that night would guide her for the rest of her life.